when you think of beer in Germany, you think of Bavaria, you think of the Keller beers that you find in Franconia, and Berlin around the turn of the 1900s, around this period, was the largest manufacturer of beer in the entire world. In Germany, we have a law. You can only make beer from 4 ingredients anyway. You can only make beer from...
Today's guest on the Guten Tag podcast is Dan Cole, a British journalist for the Berliner magazine, a travel curator, and the co-author of 2 books, Hiking in Berlin and Wine and Hiking in Germany. We discussed craft beer, German wine, and fascinating local producers and their stories.
You said you don't feel British anymore.
No, not really.
What's so different between British and German?
Wow, what a question.
We want to thank one of our sponsors for supporting this podcast. WonderTax is a platform that makes your tax declaration in Germany easy. You can maximize your tax return with tips on deductible costs and a plausibility check. Try it out for free and only submit if you're fully satisfied. Visit gutentag.wondertax.de and give it a try. Now, without further ado, let's start with the conversation. Daniel Cole, how are you doing?
Thank you very much for the intro.
So you're a journalist. You write a lot about the music industry in Berlin, especially right for the magazine Ex-Berliner, now called The Berliner.
Yeah.
And also you do some tour guides. You're a friend of one of our previous guests, Johnny Whitlam. And the first thing, and before we get into the other topics, I would like to know what brought you to this city. How do you end up here?
Well, that's when a lot of people are asked this, people give answers that they're driven by, their passions, and, they wanted to succeed in artistry or whatever. And mine isn't quite as interesting as that. I moved here in 2007 or 2008. I'm from the UK, and I was studying in Bristol at the time. I was studying a business degree. At the time, as part of the degree, you had to do a year in industry, and the university really encouraged you to go and work in a bank or go and work for Boeing. And at the time, I was playing in bands and DJing, and I really didn't find that interesting.
Okay.
And I was very lucky to find that you could do an internship in Berlin at a record label.
Okay.
Because Germany's very good at offering internships to students. And at the time, the UK was part of the EU as well. So I was able to get cross-cultural funding to help me come and do my internship here. So I came here and I did my internship at a record label, K7 Records. It's a great place for anyone who wants to put their foot in the water when it comes to working in the music industry. And I made a lot of contacts, and I moved back to the UK and finished my degree. And I think it was the same day that I got my qualification, I got an email from another company in Berlin and said, "Are you still around? Do you want to come and work for us?" And I said, "No, but I can come on the plane within a week." And that's basically my story. It was very much integrated into what I wanted to do, like work in the music business. And just lucky enough, I was offered a role and just came over and stayed.
Okay, but that was more than 10 years, many years ago.
Yeah.
Why did you stay?
Again, I just didn't really feel like, moving is hard.
Yes.
Moving countries is very, very hard. And so I just didn't want to. I was very, very comfortable living here. The quality of life is way better here compared to the UK as well. Really much better health service, better social systems. When I lost my first job, I was given unemployment benefit and access to resources to help me retrain and look for more work. Yeah. And these are much better circumstances than you find.
Oh, okay. So you don't have that in the...
You do, but not to the same extent that you do here. So as a citizen here, I feel very well like wanted and cared for, and I think that's really important when you live somewhere. And then that's when I stepped into music journalism. I felt like I wanted to do something more creative, and there was an opportunity for me to run a magazine that was being set up here. And so again, it was a situation where the kind of stars aligned, and I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to try something new. And and so when I write about music or music journalists, or music culture, I'm very interested in writing about how it affects people, culture, and society. I think that's a lot more interesting than, say, writing about how the sounds change or how good a party is, for instance. I think that music is very integrated into society, and that the evolution of the both help create narratives around who we are, what we want, and where we're going.
Yeah, we want to talk a little bit about what is in this book. I started to read it, and I didn't know that.
And didn't you realize that there is a version in English?
Yeah, I bought the version in German. Daniel brought the version in English, so it's better for Benji to read that. And well, I didn't know there was such a big culture of beer in Berlin. I mean, of course, Germany is known because of its beers, but Bavaria seems to be like the capital of beer. And what I have seen here, that there's a lot of breweries in Berlin, and maybe it's getting more respect, or I don't know how's the perception on the rest of Germany, because every little town has its own Keller beer. But I didn't know there were so many in Berlin already.
Yeah. So just kind of to segue from what we were talking about into this. So I was running a music magazine and then started freelancing, and I got into travel journalism, and I started writing for an American publication, and I started doing travel articles. And one article I did was called Hiking and Drinking, the best hikes that you can do where you can discover regional drinks. And the article took off. And the editor came back to me and said, people are really responding to this super well. And it was at that point that I thought, okay, I really want to go into publishing with this, or like see where I can take this further. And at the time I was working with the co-author of the book, Yvonne Hartman, and we decided to put this project together, Hiking and Drinking. Like we have a website, Instagram, whatnot. And through that, we got this first book offer from this publisher based in Switzerland. They're called Helvetic. And yeah, they offered us to produce this book, Beer Hiking Berlin. And I think you were asking about the beer culture in Berlin. So it's very interesting. If you go back, far back to the Industrial Revolution and perhaps the industrialization of beer, as it were, Berlin, around the turn of the 1900s, around this period, was the largest manufacturer of beer in the entire world. The Kulturbrauerei, obviously you can tell by the name that it was an old beer factory. It was the biggest sole manufacturing point of lager beer on the whole entire planet. If it wasn't for the war, the separation of the city, who knows, in many different regions. I mean, beer is just like a very small part of, our lives and our community. But what would have become of the city, like, if these things hadn't have happened? Because it was the most important place on the planet for beer. Wow. Now, today, you say, well, when you think of beer in Germany, you think of Bavaria, you think of the Keller beers that you find in Franconia, and that's a lot of the feedback we got when we published this book this year. The first feedback was, "Oh, Berlin, they know nothing about beer," and the second feedback was, "You can't go hiking in Berlin," and I find the two things, those two statements completely inaccurate. For a start, I would argue, and this is going to be a very hot take, that Berlin at the moment is the number one city for craft beer in the whole of Europe.
Real.
Yeah, there are a minimum of 40, 45 different craft beer manufacturers within the city that do everything from kind of your international styles to your Belgian beers to your German beers, your sours, everything. Everything is available here throughout every single district. And so with that, I think there's such a wide offering that brings so many different tourists and people associated with the beer industry to the city. It's when you compare it to Bavaria and this kind of Keller beer thing, they do it very well, but they have a minimal offering. It's very limited to your Weiss beers, your Helles, and they do it very well. And these are the origins of beer history and beer culture within Germany and the entirety of Europe. But at the moment, the future for me, it's here in this city. I mean, you have to remember that the craft beer revolution only really kicked off perhaps around 2000, 2008. And a lot of it had to do with these kind of new strains of hops that were being pioneered in the US. And so it kind of took a while for it to integrate into Berlin and German culture anyway, because cultural progress takes longer here, I would argue, than perhaps in other places in the world. But there were a few places that really kind of picked up on it. And one of the first pioneers in the city was, I think his name's Thomas Schupper. He runs Schupperbrau. They have a brewery on Schönhauser Allee. You can find their beers predominantly within kind of the bio-organic supermarkets. But they were one of the first ones to take off. But it was around about this time that you were starting to have like a cosmopolitan feel of the city. There were a lot more like immigrants, people from other countries, such as ourselves, that were moving here. And that started to also change up the beer scene as well, because you had a lot of different voices and minds that were coming and bringing their own ideas, different flavors. And you had stuff like, for instance, Vagabond Brewery in Wedding, which is owned by, or at least started by, a couple of American guys who wanted to kind of create this kind of American craft beer vibe and style of beer and add it to the Berlin scene. And it was, these assortment of factors that helped kind of pioneer and craft the scene that we have today.
I can imagine the resistance maybe of the Germans, because it's like, why are these Americans going to try to tell us how to do beers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They don't know, they know nothing about beers, right?
Yeah, I mean, people in their country, they are very jealous about their own beer. So I can imagine, like, even in Mexico, like some people may say that they have the best
Our
beer.
Corona.
Yeah, which is not the one that I was thinking, but yeah.
Okay.
But like Belgium also, they say that they have a very good beer. And there's always this polemic about who has the best beer in the world.
They say they have the best one, right? Yeah? The Belgians. They claim they have the best beer, right?
Yes, they claim. I don't know, like, if it's true. But they have a good beer. Yeah. But also, like, we have this discussion also here in Germany between regions of Germany. But so it's something that is very much into the culture here. And now that there are so many breweries here in Berlin, I can imagine that there will be an evolution and there will be like better beers over time. That is not something that may happen in Bavaria, that they just say, okay, we have our perfect beer and we will not change anything on it.
I mean, you also have craft beer in Bavaria. It is also a thing.
Okay.
But you know, if you go, for instance, in Franconia, or if you go in the countryside, there are a lot of these kind of small breweries, places that have been there for hundreds of years that, you know, have been making these kind of lagers. They are not suddenly going to get a hazy IPA or, you know, an American brand on tap. They're very much stuck in their culture, and as they should be, because, you know, they attract people from across the world that want to go there, that want to be a part of, you know, their culture and their history, and kind of engage with that. I don't think that you have people revolting around the changes that are happening here, particularly because, for instance, in Germany, you have a law to say that you can only make beer from 4 ingredients anyway. So there is there's only a limited scope to what you can do and what you can create within the beer scene here. But
There's a law, you said? Like a law, or like I don't know.
No, it's an actual law. It's the Reinheitsgebot.
Okay.
And it's from the 1500s, and it says that you can only make beer from water, hops, and barley, and yeast. And you can't add anything else to it. So, if you go to the States, you go to Belgium, you go to any other country, then they use a lot of other different ingredients or fruits or sweetened additives to their beers. You can't do that in Germany. So you still have to brew beer within the Reinheitsgebot.
But is it that you cannot, or is it that it's not beer if you do that?
Exactly, it's not beer. It's not. You cannot classify it as a beer.
This kind of like, it's not champagne if it's not from the region of Champagne.
Yeah,
otherwise
exactly,
it's just sparkling wine. So okay, I get it. For the record, we're having here in these cups Bavarian beer.
Well,
that's the secret to making podcasts.
I have water actually.
Okay, good Agustina. They in the Späti, they didn't have any other beer. They didn't have Berliner Pils or anything. They only had Bavarian beers there. Therefore, we're drinking. Yeah, and tell me a little bit how a Bierwandern or like a beer track looks like.
Actually, this book is part of a series of books by the publisher. They actually do beer and wine hiking guides to locations across the world. There's beer hiking guides to Paris, Bavaria, New England, Quebec. And so the format is always the same. But when it came for us to apply that format to Berlin, we were very fortunate in that 2 years before we had the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I used this opportunity to discover the city to a degree that I didn't know before, and kind of felt ashamed that my knowledge of the city was almost next to nothing.
Okay.
So every weekend I would kind of pick a place on the map, go hiking, Berlin, Brandenburg, and luckily that information came to be so useful when it came to putting this book together. So when it came to creating the hikes, so the structure of the book is that there are 40 breweries or 40 brew houses, and there is a hike to each one that goes through a historical, significant, or culturally relevant neighborhood with some specific sites along the way. So it has to tick off these values in that it has to be interesting, it has to be picturesque, and there has to be something to see along the way.
What's your favorite one?
So we cheated a little bit in that some of them are not in Berlin, but they are all within the BVG ABC zone.
Okay.
So you can still get there with I don't even know how much the tickets cost nowadays. I'm not keeping track. They seem to be, every time I go and see a ticket there, they seem to be going up in price. But yeah. For like 10 euros for a day ticket, you can go and do whatever hike that you want. I guess my favorite would be the last one we did in the book. Was quite a random discovery. There's a place near the Tesla factory, and the brewery is called Flügelshof, and it was set up by a couple.
Flügelshof,
and they claim it to be the smallest brewery in Brandenburg, if not Germany.
Okay,
and they're literally brewing with 1 liter brewing tanks in their garage. But the place itself also serves as a cafe where the brewer's wife makes homemade cakes and salads and stuff. And then you can go there and you can try his beers, and it's very homemade and it's very quaint, but at the same time, it's very, I don't know, it feels very enriching, you know, it feels very, you know, you always feel welcome going there because it has such this kind of like, as you say in America, these mom and pop vibes.
Well, in England, it's like you have the pubs, and the pubs, they have their local beer, right, as well, and then you feel like very homey there, and yeah,
exactly, yeah. This area as well, just outside Berlin, Grünheide. It's not like your obvious place where people go to for I don't know, for doing hiking or for whatever, but it's really beautiful. It's really has some really nice parts of nature. There's some great lakes around there as well.
And a big factory around.
There's a big factory around as well. Yeah, I mean, you can't see it when you're there.
You can camp in the area maybe if you want to protest.
Exactly, you can find a tree to maybe put a hanger mat in. Exactly, yeah.
No, but for the picture, it looks very beautiful. So there in the picture, you can see a lake and so a lot of nature and a bridge.
Now let's talk about German wine.
I think Germany is known worldwide for its wines, but predominantly more for its Riesling. Over 2/3 of German wines that are sold are white wines, and I forget what percentage, but the majority of those are also Rieslings. So Riesling is kind of a low alcohol, very fruity but light white wine.
A bit sweet, right?
Exactly, yeah. It can also be a dessert wine. So it's not predominantly known for the other varieties of wine. So as you said, putting together this book was a very educational experience in discovering new wines that are available that aren't predominantly known throughout the world. But I would have to say that the wine culture in Germany is also having a similar moment to what we were talking about with the beer scene in Berlin, in that it's also changing. It's becoming more diversified, and that has a lot to do with the wine growers and the people that are associated with the wine industry becoming more diverse, becoming more young, and being more open-minded in terms of what people want and what they want to produce. So I think, and it's difficult for me to speak to the fact because I've only been a citizen of Germany for so long, but I have this feeling that a lot of Germans have this mentality that wine was, it was okay back in the day, but now it's getting pretty good.
Okay.
And I would have to agree to that. There's a lot more, people are just being a bit more creative with what's happening.
All right, cool. And how is the business is it growing? Because you were mentioning before also that in the beer, some of the breweries were having a little financial problems, many of them. So because of the increasing costs and so on, is it that same thing for the wines, or what was your perception in general on these two industries?
So yeah, I mean, this year there's some problems with the beer industry in Berlin, and that's related directly to inflation in that wage costs have gone up, heating costs have gone up, and if you think about it, making beer is essentially just boiling things over and over again. So there's a lot of energy that needs to go into that, and quite a few of the brewers in the city are suffering because they can't make ends meet. The wine industry is having very different problems, and that it's having to deal with climate change.
Yes. So I hear, for instance, that wine from many years ago, like before Chernobyl, or these things, it tastes different than wine from today.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And also, like right now, I don't know, in Mexico, we have like 30 degrees that we never had before in Mexico City, in the main city.
Yeah.
35,
yeah, and then
we never had that before.
No, and then there are animals that they are dying because it's too hot, like in the jungle, in the forest, this kind of thing. So I can imagine that also here it is very hard for this kind of plants to grow properly to give proper wine.
Yeah. I mean, obviously what you're talking about is more important and predominant than than for us to like enjoy a fermented grape drink, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the hotter temperatures, for a start, they change the character of wine. It creates more sugars and it gives it more fruity flavors. So wine producers are having to change what they're making. But there are also negative effects in that, you know, it kind of changes the soil profile. There are water shortages, and there are increased risks of pesticides. Pesticides or at least factors that are influenced by the heat that are not helpful to the cultivation of wines, grapes, viticulture, etc. Like we're recording this in mid-May. I don't know if you remember, but 2 weeks ago, like the temperature massively dropped here.
Yes.
And that happened all across the country. And so this is the time when the vines are starting to come out and they're starting to bud, and they're starting to cultivate the grapes. But because there was a huge drop in temperature and there was a frost, a lot of the wineries, the vines were damaged. A lot of them, this has a massive impact on their business. So when you think of climate change, it's not just that, okay, we have really hot summers, but we also have these massive temperature fluctuations throughout the year. And yeah.
You were telling me also something, a story about a winery here in the region near where used to be an old mine.
Yeah.
Right.
So for me, one of the most interesting stories from this book is a place called Valkenburg. It's a winery just located in the very south of Brandenburg, on the border, just south of Cottbus, and it's located in an old open cast strip mine. So in Germany, particularly, brown coal, lignite, is mined using these giant earth moving machines. You know, like if you've been to Melt Festival, you'll see them. You know, you party into these giant machines, but they're still in use. They're called like baggers, and they generally, you know, I can't say how big they are. They have these giant wheels and they turf out the ground, as opposed to other mines where you just kind of put a building in and dig a hole in and you extract it like this. So in this winery, at the time, in the last century, the mine was operated by Vattenfall, and they were obligated to make sure that the land was repurposed somehow that kind of gave back to the community, because they had to knock down villages, they had to destroy landscapes, they had to, you know, it really destroyed the ecology of the area.
Okay.
And so, for whatever reason, they came up with the idea of like, hey, let's turn this place into a vineyard. Let's create a winery. So they got together with a local university and got some experts in. And because it's a mine, it kind of has really steep slopes, and so it was perfect for cultivating vineyards. And so over time, they've created this wonderful winery. And it's such a weird experience because, especially, it's a hiking guide. So you hike there, you hike through the mine, which looks like the surface of Mars. It's like a super desert.
Okay.
It's still being in use. So in the background, you can see these giant, almost like alien contraptions still there, still digging the earth, still sifting for lignites. And then you wander into this vineyard where, it goes on for, I guess, something like half a kilometer. And in the middle, they have this kind of Tuscany-like residence where you can go and sample the wines,
nice,
and eat the food, meet the owners. And then, you know, in the background, there's still this giant earth mover. It's very, very surreal.
Poetic. Real, yeah, that's surreal.
But the wines are super fantastic. They have real character and they have real flavor, because surprisingly enough, this area of Brandenburg receives even more sunshine than the west of Germany.
Okay.
And
that's
because
good for the wine.
It's great for the wine, yeah.
Grapes.
And because it's south facing as well, it's even better, yeah.
There's a lot of things about it. Do they need sun?
I mean, if there's one place I really recommend from this book that people visit, it's there.
Okay.
I mean, especially because it's from Berlin, it's super accessible as well.
Yeah, you wouldn't imagine there's something like that here in the region, right? Like, I think just the area near the Rhine is the one that is more known because of the vineyards, or like Stuttgart and that region, Esslingen.
Yeah, we were in the winery.
In Stuttgart, like near Stuttgart, in Ulbach, I think it's called. Yeah, we were just like going to the top of chapel on the top, and then we just went down through the vineyards. Was quite cool.
Yeah.
Now that you were talking about, like inflation and things that are affecting, for example, some breweries and so on, I also read an article of yours that it was also related with that increasing cost inflation, but it was now directed more like into the club scene. You mentioned the word like KLUBSTERBEN, which is a word that is apparently also, or like a word that is being used here. What got your curiosity to write about it?
So, because I contribute to the monthly edition of the Berliner, I have an editorial column where I get to mainly rant about things that please me or displease me within the music industry. And I remember I was a few years ago, I was DJing at Menschmeyer, and I haven't been out to clubs much since the pandemic. But when I was there, I was looking at the drink prices at the club, and I thought, wow, it is really expensive nowadays.
Yeah.
To go out, and I thought, wow, I don't even think I could genuinely afford to go out and have a good time anymore. And then the kind of more I looked into it, and the more I spoke with friends and whatnot, and I saw the costs, the entry costs for clubs. They're really different from how they were when I moved here, and I sound like such like a granddad saying, "Well, things were a lot different when I first moved here." But I mean, wow, they really are, and I'm in two minds about this. Having high costs is really prohibitive for people, minorities, those of lower incomes, to really go out and be part of this culture. And music is all about culture. As I said at the start of the podcast, it's what brings us together. It's what connects people. But, if it costs 30 euros or 25 euros to get into Berghain, then I don't think a lot of people can afford that.
I thought you were going to say, I don't think a lot of people can go there, but like, oh, I haven't been there because I'm not allowed. I'll pay even if I pay.
So then with that, you have to think, well, who are these spaces designed for?
Yeah.
Because, who are they intended to bring together? But at the same time, I understand that with inflation, puts pressure on the costs of employing people, of electricity, of I guess heating. Because these places need to be operated during the week as well.
Yeah. Also, many times I hear like this place will close because they want to renegotiate the contract. For instance,
they want to renegotiate the contract.
Yeah, so
there's pressure from developers, from neighbors. It's really. I thought about this before I came here, and I remember, again, I'm going to sound like such a granddad, but when I lived here in 2008, things were a lot different, but they really were. There were a lot more clubs. There were a lot more spaces for partying. There were a lot more places there were just more than partying. There were like art spaces that had DJs, that had installation events, that had theater and whatever. And there was just a lot more dynamics and integrations of different parts of society that were happening. there were a lot less clubs here. There's a lot more space. So there's a lot less spaces now, and I can feel the real pressure of what it is to run and throw events, and it's a shame.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is, but things are definitely a lot different.
Minimum wage also has gone up. Back in the days, there was no minimum wage. 2010, 2008, there was none.
Well, I think there's always been a minimum wage, but it was definitely a lot lower. And the reason why the new minimum wage was increased was because of the increased inflation that happened because of the pandemic, and then the war with Russia and the rising gas prices. So, I'm not criticizing the fact that we have a higher minimum wage, but all the factors that are coming together are not helping club culture carry on or survive.
But it's true that you can see now the inflation. So some people see it with the clubbing, others see it with the price of the kebab.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They want to put a limit on the price of the kebab.
Yeah.
I don't know how they plan to do that. Just kebab? What about shawarma?
No, but
what about veggie kebab?
I mean, it's incredible. So I remember having a kebab for $2.50.
Yeah.
And now it's €6. If you find it cheap.
7.
See, cheap. If you want cheap.
Cheap one is 6, yeah.
Again, I'm going to put my granddad hat on, but when I first moved here, the price of my apartment was €180.
Apartment?
A room in a VG.
Okay.
And a kebab was $1.99.
Wow.
So, those were the days.
Back in the day. Yeah. 10. A 10. You got
pretty sure.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's a lot of nowadays a lot of different dangers in clubs. Or there's an article written by you that caught my attention about 2 musicians or 2 DJs from LA who got an overdose because in what they were taking there was some fentanyl in it, and they got intoxicated they got intoxicated with it.
So the problems related to drugs at the moment, I think, is a hot topic that I think everyone should take seriously, in that fentanyl is being used or mixed with recreational drugs, not to the extent that it is done in the US. So these were artists that I had worked with previously, and they were based in Los Angeles. And fentanyl poisoning and fentanyl addiction is a huge issue over there. But it is becoming more prevalent within the EU and within Berlin. And I'm not a drug user myself, but I think that drug use should be more openly talked about, because the only way that these kind of things can be prevented is through greater degrees of conversation, and that unless we are openly pushing for and supporting for people to do drug testing, it's only through these means that we can prevent deaths or further deaths within the city.
Yeah, so you're really someone who is a curator and can recommend stuff, like if you're a traveler or something, you know those places. And talking about guided tours and everything, you're doing something new with our friend Johnny Whitlam as well.
So one of my other many jobs that I have here is I work as a tour guide, but I mainly do stuff and curate stuff that isn't in Berlin. It's in Brandenburg, Saxony, and I kind of create different like hiking adventures and experiences that people aren't familiar with or wouldn't expect. But I'm friends with Johnny Whitlam, like your previous guest, and earlier this year we kind of thought we should do something for the Euros, because the Euros are kicking off in a few weeks. 4 of the games are being held in Berlin. I'm a big football fan, And so it all came together, and we thought, hey, let's put together a football history tour that focuses on the Cold War that we can run throughout the Euros. Because it's not something that's really been talked about or done before. So for us, it was exciting to research and put it together. And I think we're super looking forward to seeing how it takes off, if people are interested, and just kind of what the feedback is going to be.
What is something interesting that you found during that Cold War?
Well, there's
traditions.
It's a super big story, but it's a story that's very synonymous with the whole of the city that happened during the Cold War. It was a city that was divided in two. So you had the Bundesliga remained in its entirety, but then the DDR formed their own league, and that had its own complications with the politics that were synonymous with the region as well. So corruption, and anything to do with kind of right-wing popularism. And so you had teams that were doing very well, which perhaps shouldn't necessarily have been.
Okay,
and
so
were also owned by people within the government that had, who had a history of, killing people, violence.
Okay.
There were associations with the Stasi, basically just very ugly scenarios. Yeah.
wow, so the FIFA for DDR.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good way of describing it. Yeah.
But those teams were, the teams from East Germany were playing also against the teams from West Germany, or were like two completely leagues playing under?
It was two completely separate leagues.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Union Berlin was the one in the East?
Exactly. Yeah. But they weren't even a part of the conversation at the time. I mean, of course they were, because they were a team in Berlin. But back then they weren't even the second biggest team. They were in the third league. They are and always have been like a working man's team. Very poor, very kind of isolated, stuck out in Köpenick, the east of the city, and they weren't even a part of the conversation. Back then, the biggest team in Berlin was BFC Dynamo, a team now that is in the fourth league, kind of very isolated, but they were supported by members of the Stasi, and they were propagated, and they were given funds and championed as these kind of one of the biggest teams in the DDR, as like a showcase team, as a prestige to say to the rest of the Europe, to say, hey, look, we have good football too.
Okay.
Because they were trying to do that with everything.
Because they were trying to do that with everything, yeah. And then as soon as the wall fell and the support from the DDR came, you saw it was all smoke and mirrors. There was nothing there, and now they're,
And now the Union Berlin is the one who managed to get into the first league.
Exactly.
Right?
It's a beautiful story of, a team that stuck to their principles, that stuck to their ideologies, that never tried to sell out. I don't know if you've been to the Alta Forestei. I think currently it's 35,000 people. I might be wrong on that. First time I went, it was somewhere in the region half of that. It's always been a team that's been about the fans first, and then everything else secondary.
I mean, if you have never been in the first league and you have hardcore fans who will go there and support you, means like those fans are super fans no matter in which league you're playing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
I went once to the Olympiastadion, but it was to watch the Hertha, but it was when it was in the second Liga.
Yeah.
So the tickets, I think, was like 10 euros.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was also fun. We bought the tickets in the hardcore area where the hardcore fans were. And it was like, was interesting, like there next to the people playing the drums and everything. I was like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
These people support their team no matter which league they're playing. Yeah. So, and that tour is kicking during the EM.
Yeah, it's during the Euros. So far we're selling tickets and putting information on Johnny Whitlam's site. There's probably a link to it in his podcast. but I think it's just Johnny Whitlam or johnnywhitlam.com or something like this.
Yeah. In England, you have a lot of also very famous for hooligans and everything. Also in Berlin, do you still have hooligans or that kind of culture? Or also back then when it was like during the Cold War, was it something like that?
Well, I mean, during the Cold War, not so much because you had state control was very high. Any kind of people who were seemed antisocial in any way were immediately punished, sent to correction centers, or they would lose their social status, within this period. The kind of jobs you got were dependent on how the state viewed you. So if you were a hooligan or you're antisocial in any way, then it didn't benefit you in any way to whatever it is that you wanted to do. Hooliganism in Germany, it exists, but not to the degree that it did exist in the UK. I think, when you ask me about how things are in the UK, I haven't lived there for 15 years. And I don't really go back or kind of even view myself so much as a British person anymore, to be honest. But hooliganism was a thing that, was very predominant, especially within the 80s. Not so much anymore. Things changed within terraced grounds. Prices increased to an extent that it kind of deterred those who were more interested in violence.
You said you don't feel British anymore.
No, not really.
Why? How come? After Brexit or what?
I think so, yeah. But as I said, I mean, I've been here for 17 or 18 years. I don't tend to go back. I feel that I've integrated to an extent that I feel more part of this culture than I do that culture. To the extent that I go back and, I found difficulty like adjusting to my prior cultural norms, like.
What's so different between British and Germans? I mean, for us, for me, it will be very hard to tell because I don't know so much about British culture. So I'm like, they're Europeans, right? How different are they?
Wow, what a question. I think, a lot of this kind of British culture is it's kind of built around this, I don't know how to describe it. There is this, I would say that in Germany particularly, I guess people have a degree of formality in terms of what their expectations are of when they deal with people. And yes, sometimes it can be super strict and annoying, dealing with people. And then in the UK, that kind of doesn't exist. People have let this formality go in a way that can be construed as being rude, even though it's not.
So I have thought that British are more polite in the way they talk.
I wouldn't say so, no. I think British people give off this impression or like to think that they are more polite in the way that they talk.
It's a Victorian stereotype.
Exactly, yeah. I guess it's difficult to know because the way in which we experience and learn about cultures that we're not integrated with comes through mediums like TV and radio, and it's not until you really go there and meet people or even spend time there that you really actually get to know how people really are. But I do think that people's expectations of British culture really come from Harry Potter and Guy Ritchie. And it's not like that at all,
And Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
Everything from BBC.
Yeah. Okay. But are you married with or in a couple with a German partner or something? Or because you said you feel very integrated and everything. I'm with a German woman, so for me it feels therefore easier. But I wonder when someone doesn't have anyone to connect to the culture, maybe it's harder. Is it like that for you, or that has nothing to do with it?
Well, I mean, not really. I mean, like I said, it has a lot to do with the time that I've been here. I got I got my German passport a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah.
I set up my own business here.
Learn German.
Learn German, friends,
Good.
you know, like it's all part of the process, really. Yeah. I think I don't want to talk down about other people so much, but I do feel like there are people here that exist with, and the metaphor is like they have one leg out of the bed, you know, like they like it here, but they're always thinking about going somewhere else, or is the grass greener somewhere? And for me, like at some point about 10 years ago, I thought, well, no, like if you're constantly thinking about being somewhere else, then you're never really going to firmly commit to actually being here and making it work.
When did you stop feeling that way, that you maybe were with one foot somewhere else? Or since the beginning you thought, new life, I don't move?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really difficult to... again, you're coming up with all the hard questions, aren't you? Yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. I'd say like about 10 years ago, I've, I guess like you, like I've known many people here that have left over time, which is weird, knowing a lot of people who come over here because the rents are cheap here and the opportunities are good here and whatever, and then they leave. And I think after a certain while, I thought, I don't want to be one of these people. Like, I want to commit. I really want to give it a go. And it's just been more beneficial just taking that mindset.
Yeah. I also feel the same way. I mean, I have met so many friends. Many have left, but I still have some. And I keep meeting new people, especially with the podcast. And I feel more connected with the city through the podcast. And then like, if I leave, I have to start from scratch again. And to meet new people and to make new friends is like dating somehow. Like, okay, you have to give it a try to find your tribe, find your group. That I also at the moment don't feel like moving from Berlin.
Yeah. And I think the difference for me, since I started writing these books and working as a tour guide, I've started to learn more about the history and the societal history of Berlin. And that feels like I'm going to therapy with my partner, Berlin. Like I'm starting to learn more about it. Its trauma, its history and its development. And I'm like, oh, I understand you so much better now. Why didn't you tell me this before?
Actually, it's a good metaphor. Because so many people live here, but it's like just they live here, just go work, then party, then sleep.
Yeah,
and they meet with the other friends who also don't like Berlin.
Exactly.
They just meet to complain. Yeah,
I've got a quote that I want. I hope you don't mind that I share with you.
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues at the Berliner, Nathaniel, he wrote a book called Revolutionary Berlin.
Okay.
He's also a tour guide. This book, Revolutionary Berlin, it's a fantastic history about the rise of unions and groups that try to thwart and change social politics within the city. And in the conclusion of the book, he summarizes the city and his relationship with the city in this quote, and he says, today, a century later, the real Berliner probably comes from Bochum, Budapest, or Baghdad, but what holds us all together is our profound dislike for this place, though apparently we hate it just a little bit less than everywhere else. And I think that kind of sums it up quite well.
Yeah. Good quote. What would you, if you could tell an advice to the younger Dan before moving to Berlin, what would you tell him?
Oh, wow. Probably get a real job. Save some money. Think about your pension, maybe. Get involved in some long-term savings. I don't know. I think my main regret living here...
You realize now that it's too late to start saving.
Yeah, tell me, right? I think my main regret living here was perhaps not taking the language so seriously. I started taking private classes 6 years ago, which kind of really accelerated my language development here. And before that, I was doing the lazy, the lazy approach of passive learning through bad schools or online courses or apps and whatever. And it wasn't really until, I took predominant steps that I really started getting to a point where I could actually converse and, further my development for. And, it's a hard step, and sometimes you have to invest money as well as time into it, but it's really something that you have to do. And that I think that would be my main thing that I would go back, and probably don't go out clubbing so much.
Great.
Yeah.
It has been a pleasure having you here in the podcast. We will put also on the links where they can find this book.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Bier Wandern in Berlin in German
and in English.
In Wine Wandern Deutschland, and Beer Hike in Berlin if you want to read it in English. Thank you very much for being here, I guess, in our podcast.
Yeah, that was awesome. You guys are good at this. Yeah.
Welcome to the show. It's the Guten Tag podcast.